I'm Craig Hansen. I direct the Food, Forest, and Water programs here at the World Resources Institute, and I want to thank you all for coming today for an event where we're basically launching 2 publications and having a live discussion about them. The first is on improving water quality. It's an assessment of looking at how to improve cost effectiveness through better targeting of U.S. conservation funds. And the second publication is looking at how to overcome the barriers to better targeting of U.S. conservation funds. So if this is not the topic that you thought you came here, please do stay. It's probably better than what you thought you were going to attend. And please stay on the webinar. We want to welcome, we've got a room, for those on the phone or on the webinar, we've got a room here of about 50 people. And I presume we have a growing list of folks on the webinar. So truly a global event today. There's a few folks we want to thank, besides all of you for taking off a early afternoon here in June. First of all, our funders, the 3 funders that really helped finance and support this work, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, and the McKnight Foundation. As many of you know, have been long supporters of issues all around sustainability and agriculture here in the United States, and so we want to thank them. What we'd like to do today is we're going to have several panelists give a quick overview of the results of these analyses, as well as a couple of discussions. And so we want to make this interactive. We set time limits, much to the chagrin of all of our panelists, time limits of 6 minutes each, so to try to really get us to the discussions. We know you all come here with perspectives and thoughts and reactions. We want to get a discussion going, which can actually continue after the event as well. Now, before we get too far along, there's a few housekeeping items. First of all would be, how do you make sure that the thing advances? There we go. First of all, restrooms are over by the elevators where you come in. Feel to go to the restroom. We will not be worried if you interrupt us going out. Please do so. Secondly, for those on the webinar, please pick the mic and speakers function. It's usually the best for getting good audio. Also, you can submit your text questions in that little red box that you see on the screen. Thirdly, we will actually address the Q&A at the end after the presentations. We're not going to do questions during. We want to get to the discussions and then get to the Q&A after that. And if you have any questions, you can email Andrew Maddox. His email is there on the screen. And just note that if you have to skip out for some reason or want to review this later on, we are actually recording this and we posted it on WRI's website in a couple of weeks. So this is a thing of permanent record. Even all of your mobile phone sounds will be picked up as a permanent record here. So just a quick background and context for this. Why are we all here? Well, we're here because of issues about eutrophication and hypoxia. You all know this issue. It manifests itself in such things as excessive algae blooms like you see here. That sailor is going nowhere pretty fast. It also expresses itself in massive fish kills that we've all heard about here in the United States and elsewhere. And one of the major sources, again, as we know, is agriculture through the runoff nutrients that get applied to the fields, runs off into waterways and leads to these eutrophic and hypoxic conditions. Other sources include wastewater treatment plants and the stormwater runoff from urban and suburban areas. But today we're going to focus on agriculture and what can be done to actually reduce the contribution of agriculturally driven nutrients into waterways. We all need agriculture. We need food that agriculture provides. We need the fiber agriculture provides, and we need the fuel that agriculture can provide. So how do you actually provide all the benefits or achieve agriculture in a way that actually reduces as well these environmental impacts? And that is the question du jour. Now, issues of hypoxia and eutrophication are not just an issue here in the United States. As we all know, these occur all over the planet. We have a website that actually tracks eutrophic and hypoxic locations on the planet. More than 300 or so sites, I think, are listed right now on this map, and it grows as nations develop. In some places, we actually see improvements over time as nations get their nutrient overload under control. Now, for the U.S. discussion today, we're going to talk about targeting. And just to be clear, what by targeting? We mean a couple of different things by targeting. It's a very multifaceted term. On the one hand, one can target, say, conservation funds toward areas that have the biggest environmental impairments, hotspots, so to speak, where eutrophication or hypoxia is quite dire and needs attention now. One can also target to actually greater protect the more pristine areas of our nation. Or one can actually do targeting which focuses on those places with the biggest potential change, right, in environmental conditions. So these are the locations where a little bit of money might actually go a long ways towards reducing the impact that otherwise would have occurred. That's one dimension, kind of a geographic dimension of targeting. Likewise, there's an economic dimension, looking at the benefit-cost ratio of targeting. Where essentially, we're identifying those acres and practices where that marginal dollar can go a long ways, the longest way, towards reducing environmental impacts, whether that be nutrient runoff or other types of environmental benefits that you're actually trying to achieve in the program. So that's a little bit of a context study, and I will be quiet in a few moments here. I will invite up in a few seconds our panelists. We have, first, we have a couple of the authors here. Michelle Perez, who most of you know she'll be on the panel today, along with Sarah Walker, an associate here at WRI. Sarah will be joining her on the panel as lead authors of these two papers and giving a summary of the key findings. We couldn't have all of WRIB speaking up here, so I just want to acknowledge the two other authors on these papers, Katie Ratar, who is around here somewhere, there's Katie, and Mindy Selman, who is right here. Many of you may know both of them. So I just want to shout out to those two for the great work on these two pieces of analysis. And our guest panelists today include Bruce Knight, former chief of USDA's NRCS, likewise John Stierna, the former senior economist of NRCS. And Bruce was telling me that if you disagree with any of the decisions he made, you can blame John for them because he took the advice from John. So I'm going to set that record straight there. But I've been told that the hardball question should go to John. Is that right? Did you volunteer for the hardball one? Okay, he played. Okay, back to you, Bruce. You get the hardball one. So say his name. Explicitly say his name if you want to come. So I'm going to invite the speakers up here. They're going to present. And then at the end, I will pick up again. I'm the moderator. We'll take questions. We'll have a mic running, a roving mic going around. When you do stand up, just say who you are and ask your question. And if possible, please keep it a question, not a monologue. All right? With that, let us go to our panelists. Come on up.
Thank you, Craig. That was great. I actually, I'm going to be the only one up here. We'll save the others coming up later. And we did vote, and they said that it was okay for me to take a little bit more time. So we thought that it was important to try to give more background on this modeling analysis, so we don't have to spend all the Q&A questions like, well, did you think about this, or how did you do that? But if you have those questions, by all means, those are important to have. So thank you so much, first of all, for coming, and I want to give a special shout out Jay Atwood, an economist at National Institute of Conservation Services, Texas, and Lee Norfleet, a scientist. This collaboration we could not have done this often now. Jay provided the cost estimate as part of the cost optimization analysis, while this is a WRI report. So the approach, the analysis, the policy implications, they all belong to WRI. And I want to thank my co-authors for work on this. So first of all, we had 4 research questions. What were they? We asked, how cost-effective is the current approach? Is the current approach to spending on nutrient and erosion control practices from 2006 to 2011? That serves as our business as usual time frame. And we know what these nutrient and erosion control practices are. Just cover crop, terracing, contour farming, nutrient management plans. So have that in mind. How much more effective could they be with targeting? Thank you for the mic. And we explored 3 targeting approaches that I'll describe later. And how do these results change depending on what environmental benefits are being optimized? And by environmental benefits, we're talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reduction, as well as soil carbon sequestration. And then we had a multiple combination benefit scenario that combined. And then finally, if programs were designed to achieve the most cost-effective benefits, where would those funds be spent? just briefly, these is the data and the models we use, the farmer survey from NRCS, the APEX model, the scientific pollution estimation model, and an economist optimization model. So again, to remind you, there were at least 3 definitions of geographic targeting that Craig brought up. What we're going to talk about and focus on today was the third one, prioritizing areas with the greatest change possible. Why did we do that? Well, because our models are restricted to analyzing what's known as the edge of field, right? The theoretical, the proverbial edge of field. And this APEX model cannot actually find these acres, these statistical acres, in anywhere in the country, but it knows where they are within the watershed when we aggregate the information within the watershed. So this analysis, just to make sure, doesn't account for where these acres are vis-a-vis interior water bodies or the contained water bodies, right? So when you all are participating in your targeted watershed project, you would know where the best acres are vis-a-vis the prioritized water bodies. But in this analysis, we prioritize acres that offer the biggest edge of field pollution reduction possible. I hope that's a little bit clear. So to familiarize yourself, there are 201 4-digit watersheds across the lower contiguous U.S. 4 digits is very large, on average about 16,000 square miles. And what do we do for business as usual? Well, so there's spending going on since 2006 to 2011 on these nutrient erosion control practices. We found out how much is being spent in each of these watersheds on average every year over that time frame. We asked the model to estimate, well, how many pounds of, say, nitrogen, phosphorus, etc., of these environmental benefits do we think are being realized at this edge of field? And then knowing the budget spent per watershed and the pounds produced, achieved in each watershed, we came up with a cost-effectiveness estimate of dollar per pound of environmental benefits for each and every watershed. So that's important to know when we turn to targeting in our 3 approaches and how we ask the model to represent the 3 approaches. Well, in geographic and benefit cost targeting, what we call dual targeting, those things get to be optimized. The model is free to roam across the country and spend money in any watershed it finds the most pollution reduction possible. And then when it's in that watershed, it can apply the practices that it finds to be greatest benefit per bang for the buck until the $335 million budget is consumed. In geographic targeting only, we took that optimized budget that the model found previously for each and every watershed to gain the greatest reductions per dollar spent. But now we handicapped this scenario by saying, well, in actual fact, you only get to spend according to the business as usual level of cost effectiveness, okay? So you got the optimized budget, a new different budget, but you could only spend according to business as usual cost effectiveness. In contrast, the opposite is true for benefit cost targeting. We kept the money in place. We didn't mess with budgets. We didn't attempt to change that, but once we knew what the budget was, we could find the most cost-effective acres and the most cost-effective practices to achieve the biggest bang for the buck. So what did we find here? Don't be overwhelmed. I'm going to walk you through this. We found that for a nitrogen reduction optimization scenario, under this dual targeting approach, that on average it cost about 30 cents per pound of nitrogen reduced, in comparison to $3.65 under business as usual, and a whopping 1.1 billion pounds was able to be reduced in comparison to 91 million pounds. This offered a 12-fold increase in environmental benefits and cost effectiveness. For phosphorus reduction, when the model aims for phosphorus reduction, but of course, as you know, when you aim for something, you get all these wonderful co-benefits as well. But when it aimed for phosphorus, there was a $2.46 cost per pound of phosphorus reduced in comparison to $19 under business as usual, and a nice 136 million pound reduction in compared to about 17 million pounds, or an 8-fold increase in cost. For sediment, it was 363 compared to 28, so about 8 times. For soil carbon, it was 14 cents compared to $1, about 7.5 times. So some clear advantages here. Bottom line is, we found that dual targeting was most cost effective. When you get to combine geographic and benefit cost targeting, it could result in about 7 to 12 times the environmental benefit per dollar spent. The second best solution was benefit cost targeting. On the rest of the funds alone in those watersheds, we could achieve 4 to 9 times the environmental benefits. That's a very nice finding. Geographic targeting alone, we found surprising. In some cases it was better, in some cases it was worse. So when you do have a bigger budget potentially, there's also potentially for smaller budgets, and we have to the old way, business as usual level of cost effectiveness. So what do we find then in terms of choosing what to target? Well, we all want to have everything, so do we, and so did the model. And we optimized for achieving nitrogen reduction, phosphorus reduction, and carbon sequestration all at once. We did find that we could achieve the most co-benefits in all of those and sacrifice the least, have to do a trade-off among those individual environments. Since that's really complex to do, multitasking is very hard. If you have only one chance to target one environmental benefit, we found that phosphorus reduction yielded the greatest co-benefits possible and minimized the trade-off to the other environmental benefits. Targeting also had a surprising finding that it may need more acres. I'm sure many of you know that one concern about targeting is that it's a lot of concern about restricting the number of producers that can participate. We found the opposite, that in fact 1.5 times the number of acres, depending on the scenario, may be able to participate in the targeting, and that may mean an increase in producers participating as well. So here's a big map, and I'll show 5 more. This is the business as usual spending in each watershed. What you see, the darker the watershed color, the greater the number of dollars being spent. In this case, about up to $15 million, $16 million in some of these watersheds. The larger the dot means the more acres being treated. In this case, up to about 500,000 acres being treated. You'll notice that there are about 7 non-priority watersheds, mainly the western areas. So you can imagine there's not much cropland there. Other natural resource concerns like forest preservation and wildlife habitat likely to dominate those areas. So, what happens when we target? This is a map for the multiple benefits optimization scenario. Well, what you see immediately is that there is a concentration of funds. And there are some watersheds that did not get treated before the $335 million budget ran out, right? Those watersheds, 73 of them, were not as cost effective as the others, or they were not dominated by cropland, or perhaps there weren't enough NRCS survey sample points there. You also find that there's an increase in funding spent in the high priority darker watersheds. We're now at $3 million when it was about $6 million. And there's an increase, a doubling of the number of acres in the highest category, about 1 million when it was 500,000 in the business. So things happen when you geographically target to try to improve environmental benefits of knowledge. I'll go through these quickly. Here's phosphorus. A little bit of a similar concentration perhaps of funds. Now the funds are skyrocketing to 30 million and about 1.3 million acres, about 25 non-priority watersheds as well. For nitrogen, a little bit similar. For sediment, a significant concentration of funds in the Mississippi River Basin, some northeast watersheds in the northwest. 100 watersheds are deemed not as cost effective as others under this scenario. And 1.6 million acres in some watersheds are being traded, $36 million being provided to some watersheds. Soil carbon sequestration, a different look, right? So some areas, higher priority for soil carbon. So 2 last slides. Well, I want to make sure that we know what this study is not. So this is not an analysis of what NRCS could have done in the past, right? This is a modeled prediction. And why is that? Because there are many scientific and technical barriers in the way, right? NRCS, we do not yet have the data and tools necessary to find these most cost-effective acres in the landscape. Institutionally, there are implementation challenges. Even though if we could find the most cost-effective acres, some farmers might not appreciate being identified as having the most cost-effective acres. And there'll be a participation challenge. So we did not include those outreach costs in this. We included technical assistance costs, but not the added outreach costs or the added transaction costs that it'll take to realize these model findings. Socially and politically, folks who are deemed non-priority watersheds likely not going to enjoy hearing about this analysis. So it is really an analysis of where NRCS could go in the future by overcoming these institutional and political barriers. So how do we do that? Let's take a few small steps first. Let's track environmental benefits. Currently, you know, NRCS is tracking administrative metrics like dollars spent in contracts and acres. We really have to move towards estimating these water quality and pollution reduction benefits. And we need the data and tools to do that. Once we have that, let's infuse that into the ranking criteria system and make sure that we're truly picking, with our limited budget, the most cost-effective contract. Let's conduct pilot projects to work out these kinks, right? And let's infuse this information into the current geographic targeting initiative, like the Mississippi River Basin Healthy Watershed Initiative. And finally, after laying the groundwork for all of that, getting real smart, having the data, the tools, the political wherewithal, let's revisit those based on the allocation formulas and see if we can. So thank you very much. I hope that was interesting and instructive, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Sarah, who will present on this today.
Everyone for coming. As Michelle said, I'm Sarah Walker. I'm an associate here at WRI in the Food, Forest, and Water program. So Michelle just gave a great overview of the potential benefits, environmental benefits and cost effectiveness that we could achieve through better targeting. But we do recognize that all of that is caveated by some major challenges. So I'm going to walk through some of the barriers to targeting and then talk about some options for overcoming them. So through a literature review and interviews with USDA staff and conservation professionals, as well as targeted watershed project leaders, we identified some of the major barriers to targeting and grouped them into three major categories: scientific and technical, social and political, and institutional and implementation. So the first major type of barrier has to do with scientific and technical challenges. So targeting involves trying to achieve landscape scale, watershed scale conservation goals through implementation of conservation down at the field scale. So in order to do that, we need to know where those priority watersheds are, where those watersheds are with the greatest impairment, what conservation practices are already in place there, and what additional practices are needed and where are they needed. So this involves pollutant load, hydrologic data on various spatial scales. And there are some tools and models, such as the U.S. Geological Society's Sparrow model, that are available for certain regions like the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And this is a map of the Sparrow model shown here with phosphorus hotspots in the bay. So tools like this are available in some areas to target priority watersheds in this case, but they're not available in all regions across the country, and they're certainly not available at all the spatial scales that we would need for targeting. So because not all areas have ideal tools for informing targeting decisions as well as assessing our progress, program managers, project leaders can perhaps better employ already existing tools and metrics and just use the best available science until we can get to those ideal tools. Things like the cornstalk nitrate test may be underutilized and can be tapped into a little bit more. In addition, there are tools in some regions that could be transferred to other areas where they're not currently calibrated, such as USDA's nutrient tracking tool, NCT. These sorts of tools could be used more widespread and calibrated to particular areas to assess farm loads, rather than having to design and build a new tool from scratch. But over the long term, we hope that USDA and universities and others will continue to invest in developing new models, improving existing models, so that we can streamline targeting efforts. And these investments are certainly big up front, but with widespread use over the long term, hopefully they'll pay off in the end. The second major barrier is social and political. So due to the historical nature of targeting, or the historical nature of conservation programs, excuse me, Producers and politicians and states continue to expect this widespread distribution of funds, as shown here in this map, and Michelle showed you this earlier. So under business as usual, it's a pretty broad distribution. And because of that, some congressmen, for example, may not be willing to support a targeted approach if their state or their congressional district is outside of these priority areas. So in this case, where we have our funding allocations under targeting, you can see, and as Michelle described, these priority areas are few and far between compared to the business as usual approach. In addition to these tensions among states and among watersheds, there's also tensions within the priority areas. So once we nail down our priority watershed in which to focus, then it's a matter of spending those funds cost effectively within that watershed. And that can cause tensions between our so-called bad actors and good actors. So the bad actors are those farmers who may not have a long history of implementing conservation. And if we're trying to maximize the environmental benefits we get per dollar spent, their farms are likely going to have higher loads, which means they'll likely be able to generate greater nutrients or other pollutant reductions. And they could be an advantage over the good actors who may have minimal gains that they could still make. So because of this common expectation that funds are broadly distributed, it's important that we strike a balance between setting aside some funds that can be geographically targeted in order to maximize our cost effectiveness, but then also leaving some funds available for producers across the country to access. And if we can't overcome these geographic challenges, these geographic targeting challenges, we can at least try to focus on focusing on costs and benefits, maximizing the cost effectiveness of the funds we do spend wherever they end up going. And we recognize that the tools and the metrics for doing this may not be readily available right now. So while we invest in better figuring out how we can assess environmental benefits of our conservation practices, NRCS could take some small steps like prioritizing conservation practices that have been proven, at least generally speaking, to be more cost-effective than others, like nutrient management or conservation tillage. So finally, institutional and implementation challenges could hinder targeting programs even if there are data in place, tools in place, political and stakeholder support. Because targeting involves a relatively new way of managing conservation, the USDA and project leaders may need increased capacity, better tools like we discussed. They're going to have to move from assessing progress in terms of contracts, like number of contracts signed, as we typically do now, to assessing progress based on actual water quality improvements achieved. And that's no easy feat. So more capacity will be needed. Because targeting, at least geographic targeting, hones in on specific areas, the eligible pool of participants, of landowners who can participate, is limited. And so the local conservation district field staff may have to be more proactive about recruiting participants and really getting those farmers involved who stand to achieve the greatest amount of reductions and who are in those priority areas. That may require multiple field visits, and some producers may simply not be able to, may not be able to be incentivized to participate. So ultimately, the success of a targeting program requires the right practices to be implemented by the right producers in the right places. And we can help get there by strengthening USDA leadership, strengthening leadership within each targeted watershed project. Strong leaders can help to make sure all the data is there, all the tools are there, programs are adequately staffed, and that they just generally have the capacity that they need to be successful. And on the watershed project level, project leaders should find some good mechanisms for involving producers in the local community from the beginning, so that they can feel ownership over the project, be more willing to participate, and know up front their likelihood of success and craft their project accordingly. And on that note, there's a recent study and some experiences from USDA's Mississippi River Basin Healthy Watershed Initiative that suggests some effective mechanisms to communicate to and engage producers. And those are things like giving them public recognition for what they're doing and explaining to them how the rest of the community is engaged, as well as communicating to them their potential losses due to inaction rather than their potential benefits due to action. So that's it from me. We hope that by identifying these barriers and starting to talk about some options for overcoming them, USDA and the rest of us can all try to make targeting programs more successful and maximize the environmental benefits and cost effectiveness of our limited federal conservation land. So at this point, we will turn it over to Bruce and John, and they'll have a few remarks, and then we'll get to questions.
Establish a new precedent by sitting down. Now it's on. Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share some observations. I'd like to point out that while the WRI report lays out some very helpful analysis of targeting funding for water quality purposes, I'd like to add a few points about the targeting issue overall to put it into perspective. One, targeting is not new to NRCS. NRCS has been doing targeting and in the past and is trying to do some right now. For example, I'm going to go back a little bit of history. NRCS implemented targeting with the creation of the EQIP program in 1996 after the Farm Bill then. The words conservation priority area and maximizing environmental benefits per dollar expended were specifically provided in the statute, and it provided authority for NRCS to go into targeting and apply it to the new EQIP programs. They used geographic areas, most of which were designated by state conservationists and state technical committees, and most of these were water quality related. NRCS also had a statewide offer index that they used to rank applications that were outside of designated geographic areas. Nearly 70% of EQIP funding at that time was set aside for targeted areas. Very little, if any, financial assistance was available to producers outside of designated areas, so a lot of pushback occurred, primarily by people that were outside of those areas and folks that were not livestock producers. Livestock had a little bit of an advantage in the funding. It did not take too long before that pushback resulted in the words conservation priority area and maximizing environmental benefits per dollar expended. They were removed from the statute in 2002. So it removed the authority for an NRCS to approach targeting that way. However, there's been some other developments over time, and NRCS has been doing some targeting by establishing a number of special landscape initiatives like the MRBI and the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program that I'm sure some of you are aware of that is being rolled out right now. Point number two, targeting can be structured many different ways with varying degrees of complexity. You've heard some of the things that Michelle laid out as far as some different ways of doing that. But I'd like to point out that targeting can be done through establishing eligibility criteria, the use of incentives, or various ranking mechanisms. Actually, the Conservation Reserve Program uses all three of those. By limiting enrollment to highly erodible land, it provides a higher payment for higher quality acreage, and it ranks offers through the use of environmental benefit index. Of course, there's other ways like geographic areas. Very broadly defined geographic areas like Chesapeake Bay and Great Lakes, it tends to lose some of the benefits of targeting. Whereas a very narrowly defined area,
sometimes it's hard to identify because of the lack of the right kind of data to be able to best identify it. And sometimes it's also harder because there'll be some greater pushback from those that are not included in it. But having solid data, as recommended by the WRI study, will help overcome that. Another approach for targeting will be based on the most effective conservation practices. NRCS did this in the 1990s with what they called the core 4 of conservation: tillage, nutrient management, pest management, and buffers. To some extent, producers' own willingness to share in the costs of conservation is a self-selecting targeting mechanism. An absentee landowner, or maybe a tenant, might be somewhat less interested in spending that kind of money compared to an owner-operated farm. That means that targeting must include a significant amount of sustained outreach and education if you're trying to be able to motivate people to invest in their share of costs. And of course, this is one of the areas emphasized by NRCS in the new Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Third point, targeting requires some real investment in suitable metrics, credible data that can help determine where the funding should go. As Michelle indicated, NRCS data tends to be largely administrative. And while there's the NRI and CEAP data and other data sources, much more remains to be done to better gauge the status of resource conditions and the effects of applied conservation. I think the WRI reports document this pretty well. But my personal thoughts are, unless NRCS places some real priority on metrics, then they should transfer that responsibility to another USDA agency with the requirement that the data be published regularly and available to the public. This will better enable locally led conservation process to have the kind of data as well as their local insight to best prioritize conservation efforts. Point 4, targeting tends to focus only on one major resource concern, while conservation programs address several resource concerns. USDA conservation programs are intended to be multi-purpose, and focusing solely on water quality ignores the other purposes that occur in the landscape, such as water quantity, wildlife habitat, soil health, wetlands, yes, and farmland protection. Many conservation practices have multiple benefits, so why not consider that in the mix of planning? So ideally, targeting should focus on maximizing all environmental benefits per dollar expended. And that goes a little bit broader than what Michelle indicated as far as co-benefits, because there's many purposes. So in conclusion, I think the WRI recommendations can be very helpful in moving conservation programs forward to improve cost effectiveness. But to begin, NRCS needs to better track the conservation needs and the multiple environmental outcomes from their conservation programs. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Knight, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. As they mentioned in the introduction, former chief of NRCS, I now have a consulting firm called Strategic Conservation Solutions, or SCS, which gives you an idea of my reverence for the agency from which we've come. My hat's off to WRI for taking on this topic and for two well thought out and well developed papers to launch this discussion on targeting and on some of the barriers that are out there. I thought I'd take a few minutes to tell you a few stories about my journey through targeting, and then we'll leave the rest for the discussions. John had mentioned that some of the authorities that NRCS had to actually target and focus things were lost in the 2002 Farm Bill. Well, an example of that is given in birth of in the 2002 Farm Bill was a little program called the Grassland Reserve Program. That landed on my desk with marvelously little direction on how to do it, and I thought it would be within the chief's purview to make those decisions. And it struck me that a Grassland Reserve Program should be targeted on areas with grass. States with a large amount of grass. Why not focus on the prairies and just rock and roll on the short grass, mid-grass, and tall grass prairie lots and call it a day? Just do it in a handful of states, maybe a dozen or so in the Great Plains, and not worry about implementation in the rest of the country. It saves a lot of money and a lot of cost, and you really get at the prairie fragmentation. Worked on that for a while. We floated that trial balloon, and within 24 hours, my tail was hauled across the street, and I was informed that we're going to implement GRP in each and every state. This is when good intention and political science collide. And what you have to understand when we're talking about targeting, what we are talking about in the context of scientific targeting or environmental targeting or economic targeting, someone from a more political background would call poppycock and say we need a political target, which in the lexicon of this town we call an earmark. Earmarks are targeting as well. As a matter of fact, earmarks are in and of themselves the first, maybe not the most elegant, but the first of the geographic targeting. And I want to help you understand a little bit about the challenge here. When you get the chance to sit in the chief's desk, which has one of the best views in D.C., though you never see it, when you get the chance to sit at the chief's desk, the axiom that you use is you need enough information to make a good decision quickly enough to make a difference. Enough information to make a good decision quickly enough to make a difference. Hence was born a rather complicated, with probably close to 100 factors in it for determining the funding allocations in EQIP as to which states would do that. And what we were attempting to do is to put as much science into that EQIP formula as you possibly could so that the scientific integrity of it would withstand the political buffering and buffeting that occurs. So it's ironic to me, after a lot of work on that, we'd targeted, or we had prioritized, based off of the science, a great deal of money going into the Chesapeake Bay. We had prioritized a investment in air quality that landed in California that could be targeted towards the San Joaquin Valley. I exit as chief, and the next Farm Bill has a politically mandated target for the Chesapeake Bay and for air quality in California, entirely ignoring the fact that the allocations of funding and resources had already been made. And as a matter of fact, the political lobby was to go that way. This is the challenge of how do you balance the scientific or economic integrity of a formula or a program against the political pressures that mount to be able to address those things. And those political pressures are coming from the countryside, but they're also coming from this community that's gathered here today, from the NGO community that's saying do more, and focus more on this. So my prescription, if you want to make targeting work, and you're really interested in making targeting work, it has to be as transparent as possible. It has to be as transparent as possible. The challenge that we've got with the formulas that are used for allocating funds within EQIP and the other programs is that they're not out there in the public for you and the NGO community to really review and say, oh, well, that makes sense. I didn't know that caused dollars to flow to this state or that state. The work that WRI has done, if your studies are delivered solely to the talking head community in D.C., your efforts will be lost because you'll only have influenced the extent to which decisions are made on conservation at headquarters at EPA or at USDA. And you won't have changed and you won't have recognized the fact that all conservation is local. Reformat an old Tip O'Neill line of all politics is local. All conservation is local. And for you to empower that, you have to have the transparency to make good decisions in Salina, Kansas. You have to have the power to make good decisions in St. Joe, Missouri. You have to have the power to make good decisions all the way through the process. And we have to have an empowerment associated with prioritization and targeting that works throughout the conservation system. It's got to make sense to the NGO community, the partners that are out there, the conservation districts that help to deliver it. It's got to make sense and something that you can explain to the guy in the county office at NRCS. You know, nothing's more frustrating to an employee to say, well, yeah, they pay me to sit here, but I don't have any money to invest with you, Joe Farmer, because it all went 3 counties over. If that's a mystery, they're not empowered. If they're explaining, well, there's a prioritization for Firesteel Creek because we're cleaning up the watershed above Mitchell, South Dakota, and that is expected to take 2 years, and when that's done, monies will be reallocated in the state. You've got a chance of having a different decision that results in a different political process. So you've got a very interesting mix that you have to take into account when you're talking about prioritization or targeting, whichever things you do. You have to mix the political science with the economic science and with the environmental science to try to make those decisions and recognize that in any agency, in any NGO, in any one of us that's involved in conservation, we also have time value. We have to make a decision quickly enough to make a difference. And we're managing things over the long haul, but we're influenced by growing season. And a decision that hampers the ability to make a decision quickly means conservation doesn't happen. And right or wrong, we're better off when conservation happens. The entire discussion here is how do we improve conservation? How do we improve targeting? With that, a few opening thoughts, and I'm ready to roll as a discussant. So, thank you.
Folks on the webinar will be gathering questions after a few rounds here. I will turn to those who are originally with us, and we will see the questions that way. I will ask everybody to gather about 3 or so questions at a time, and then leave that to the panel and talk to us. Let's do all right. So, who's first? Who's on? All right.
Roberta Perry in EPA. I guess this question is both for Bruce and John. So how was CRP able to use the EBI and HEL to target? What's different about CRP than EQUIP?
Just one interesting little thing. CRP is the same part of Title 12 of the 1985 Food Security Act as amended, but it specifically enables use of priority areas. And internally within USDA, it actually was an evolution of going towards the Environmental Benefit Index, and Economic Research Service was a big part of that in the early 1990s. When it came to the 96 Farm Bill, which was really continuation of the original CRP statutory authority, there was a lot of discussion on the way to approach it, and the Secretary made a significant decision about use of the Environmental Benefit Index, and that was sustained. it was a very very significant process. A lot of went on behind the scenes that people are not aware of, but me and some of my former friends at FSA could tell you some interesting stories about the way that evolved and the selection of offers used as the environmental benefit index. It was very significant. But the statutory authority was really what made it different.
EBI is very interesting in that you have a fairly transparent process of how a particular piece of land may be ranked. But remember, in the beginning years of CRP, there was also a bid-down process.
Yeah.
And Congress ripped that away from the agencies because farmers were responding and saying, well, I really want to retire this land. I'll take less money for it. And Congress said, no, you can't. We can't have that sort of targeting occurring. So each agency had their experience. My hat's off to FSA in that with their conservation programs, they probably have the most transparent database of how the decisions are made and what are the returns. The CRP database, one can slice and dice and analyze very easily. The EQIP database is much more difficult, and that's more transparent, I believe, than 319. So each of them we've got room to make improvements in. The challenge in EQIP is that an individual EQIP contract goes through a ranking process, not unlike the way EBI works. And when I was chief, I actually directed the agency to publish all of each state's EQIP ranking process on the web so that every farmer could see it going in. There's only probably maybe a dozen states that are still doing that, so the farmer can actually see, or somebody in the NGO community can see how those decisions are being made in EQIP on a given contract. That's something that should be brought back to put that transparency back into place.
I'd like to just add one thing, though. The CRP decision-making with respect to the Environmental Benefit Index was very centralized in Washington, whereas all of the decisions of accepting offers on EQIP was done at the state level, so much more decentralized.
Skip Heiberg, FSA. This is for Bruce. Bruce, one way of introducing transparency would be to talk about the benefits that accrue to a program and track, as you put a conservation practice, estimating. You've gone through that process. In fact, you were leading the CEAP process, and you helped FSA get some monitoring money to talk about benefits from the CRP. What would it take for NRCS to adopt this, and what are the barriers, what are the resources that would be required?
Since CEAP was born, the Conservation Effects Assessment Program, it's met only a portion of its expectations. I think we have an outstanding database and an outstanding point to do things. I almost think we need a doubling of the number of points out there to really be able to utilize the information. And then we need a commitment, and this is really needed throughout USDA, to open source data. In that the CEAP results, once you figure out how to address confidentiality, CEAP needs to be put into the public domain so that everybody can look at it and dissect it, so the NGO community can look at how to utilize that. That will inspire greater opportunities in being able to move forward on CEAP. I think next generation of CEAP, we need to merge what's underlying CEAP with the efforts that I see at the National Ag Library and elsewhere about life cycle analysis. I need to see CEAP meet life cycle analysis and bring those together so that the data is talking to each other, so that the CEAP data rolls up to assist in the LCA work that is driving the sustainability community. So that's my dream long-term schedule.
Hi, Ron Hoffman from EPA. I'm glad to see you're all in the same panel. It looks like you're all friends. But you didn't answer to Bruce and John, perhaps you didn't answer the question that I was meaning to ask, which is, when you saw the presentation of the WRI work, what condition, you said, well, there's some great work, but there's some shortfalls here, mostly some aspects of socioeconomics. And the question to you is, what would be needed to be done in addition to what was done to make it more, might I say, useful to the decision process in the USDA? I think it's a tough question, so whoever is.
You go ahead, sir.
Personally, I really think WRI report, as good as what it is, it's focused solely on water quality. And even within that, it's not as comprehensive. All you got to do is talk to somebody from California right now. They would argue that water quantity is also a key issue. I would suggest needing to move towards looking at multiple benefits and evaluating outcomes on multiple benefit areas, and then try to be able to move towards greater targeting on that. And that requires some good information on the effects of conservation practices for multiple resource concerns.
And just a second. I've been very clear about, I think, on some of these things. Rolling this down the level of transparency that folks can actually use this information makes a big difference. These studies, the technical committees, the state technical committees, really need to be able to have access to this. Same information. The state technical committees really need to be able to have access to CEAP information so they can make good prioritization decisions. To reinforce what John said, and you see this in WRI analysis, you maximize effectiveness if you're managing, in the case of water quality, for both nitrogen and phosphorus. That was a clear takeaway. There's some interesting stories in here, too, if you look at those maps. It actually says politically the administration's made a whole lot of push on the upper Mississippi and should be doing more on the lower Mississippi as well. And that's hidden in the report and not highlighted. So you got to just access the information, start peeling it away, and then use it to make management decisions. That's the whole thing. Targeting shouldn't make the decisions. Targeting gives you the philosophy and the information to make good management decisions.
And just to expand on that, we actually have, in a month or two, we'll be providing online a follow-up analysis that we did not include in this report, which was to focus on how these sediment reductions might benefit aquatic species that are, in so many words, being smothered by excess sedimentation in some streams. The map will show a geographic concentration in the southern areas that Bruce just highlighted in the Mississippi River Basin and in the southeast parts of the United States, which this data is telling us are the greatest concentrations of aquatic species and streams that could benefit from a great change in sediment reduction. And to John's point about, yes, we absolutely had to figure out what to focus on and what to target, and our charge was to include a little bit of climate change, and we were able to do that with a soil carbon analysis, and we didn't present to you some nitrous oxide analysis. But you're also limited to what you can jam into one model all at once, right? And so it is a fundamental technical hurdle to develop models that can talk to each other and handle all of these different environmental and natural resource metrics. The good news is work is underway. This study was focused on cropland, CEAP cropland reports. They're working on wetlands, and they're working on grasslands. So we're going to get to be able to expand the focus of analysis to 2 additional areas and issues. So, FYI.
But might there a discussion be warranted ahead to say what are the critical factors of the 100 or so that others worry about, whether or not there's water availability, runoff, or, for example, farm income? Because the sustainability pillar has the social and economic angle. So perhaps some, the idea of linked models might be just a question, might be something to find those critical factors that would make it more useful for the client there. Thanks.
That sounds good. Let's develop a working group right after this.
Hi, this is for Michelle. One of the 3 outcomes you presented was that geographic targeting alone may or may not result in greater environmental outcomes than business as usual. In your finding on that, is there any small tweaks that might tilt that the other direction so it's clearly one or the other?
Clearly one or the other what?
Clearly geographic targeting is better. Is there something policy-wise or something that you saw in that outcome that might change your indecision on that outcome?
Well, and yes, and to be clear, the way geographic targeting was developed and represented in this model is hardly what you and I think of when we think of the MRBI Targeted Watershed Project, right? Or the new Targeted Watershed Project under RCEP, or the long-standing Targeted Watershed Project under EPA 319 program, right? So that is the best kind of geographic targeting at the scale of which that a watershed is prioritized because there is something in the watershed, a stream, a lake, a river, that folks have said, we want to clean that up. And folks know how much to clean it up by, and they know the sub-areas that are critical for identifying the farmers and the practices to help with that cleanup. And in some cases, there may be a point source as well that needs to be involved with the cleanup. So in that sense, those geographic targeting efforts are critical, essential. That's how water quality is going to clean up. But for our analysis, when we handicapped it by restricting it to the business as usual level of cost effectiveness, and the budgets changed, when it was, I think my co-authors can help me, when it was one pollutant reduction over the other, I think the change was so minor, the blip above BAU and below BAU was so minor, I wouldn't call it statistically valid, so I wouldn't give it too much credence. And for geographic targeting alone, I'd keep the conversation at the Targeted Watershed Project level. Hope that helps.
Leroy Hansen, the Economic Research Service. I have a question for John and Bruce. When it comes to a report like this on targeting, and we look at programs, NRCS programs, we see states implementing these programs. So if you're going to get buy-in, when individuals see such a report, you've got to get 50 people buying, or 50 states to buy in. So how would you suggest selling a product like this across 50 states?
This is the challenge of the way our conservation delivery system is set up. It's set up under the precept that a better decision can be made at the state or local level than it can be in Washington, D.C. I've spent the better part of the last 30 years in D.C. living the fact that that's true. I really believe these conservation decisions are better made at the local level, but we have to make the investment in empowering that. Otherwise, it's about simply an even distribution scheme that goes out there. In some states, it doesn't work much better than that. So we really need to make this information available. As I mentioned before, I think this is a failure of CEAP in that it's not available, the data and results, to the public so that they can make decisions on this in the NGO community. It doesn't appear before a state technical committee. The results of these studies or other things on targeting really need to be delivered to the state technical committees so that that can influence how they make those decisions and management of those. You also need access. You can't do that in vacuum. You also need access to what are the results from EPA investments as well, because all of this needs to be layered into this. The State Technical Committee in South Dakota has made what I think is it's an interesting, rational decision in reference to the Grassland Reserve Easement Program. They offer the Grassland Reserve Program in areas where the Fish and Wildlife Program is not offering its Grassland Easement Program. so that they can target the best acres throughout the state without the two programs competing. Sometimes I agree with it, sometimes I disagree with it, but I do respect the fact that there was a local decision made on it. This means we really need to make a commitment to empowerment. The other empowerment we need is transparency on which practices work best in which areas. Now, cover crops are more effective in the Midwest than they are in the Great Plains, probably, but we don't have enough research on that. Terraces intuitively are more effective on steep ground than flat ground, but we need to be able to evaluate different practices in different areas to determine what's the best way to make those allocations.
Hi, Joshua Sewell with Taxpayers for Common Sense. So I was wondering if you could speak a little to, we just came, we were in the implementation stage of the Farm Bill, which seemed to be a great opportunity to make some progress on some of these issues. Could you speak a little to what, if any, progress has been made and any of the obstacles that you may see arising from the changes that do exist in the Farm Bill, in the conservation programs and other areas?
Far and away, the biggest change that was made in this Farm Bill that increases conservation cost effectiveness was the relinking of crop insurance and conservation compliance. Common sense, easy solution that enhances the returns out of both the conservation programs and the crop insurance program.
I would agree, but also I would add the opportunity that's available to the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, largely because it's locally driven, i.e. whoever those potential partners might be can identify those areas and move ahead. Secondly is because it really is focused on the resource concern. And third is NRCS has really mandated look at outcomes. What will be the outcome? And there is that need to report on that. And then obviously leveraging of resources. So it's given a bigger bang for the buck for the federal dollars that are invested.
I just build on what you just heard and say the really neat thing about RCPP is that we've specifically identified partners that have never been identified before, which are the wastewater treatment utility and the water utility community. So they're every bit members of the watershed and in many cases have a lot of expertise and a lot of resources to bring to a project. They could, share their water quality monitoring data. They could decide to install new water quality monitoring stations in certain locations. They could provide additional financial resources to the farmers in the watershed through these new targeted watershed projects.
And I'll just do a quick plug. This afternoon, I'll be releasing a blog that gives a quick overview of the RCPP and what they're doing well. And we were happy to see that. Well, we'd at least like to claim some credit for some of the recommendations we made in our first publication on MRBI. Things like they're asking the applicants to include at least like a qualitative discussion about the cost effectiveness of their proposed practices, which is something that was missing from MRBI and the other landscape conservation initiatives.
I'll make one comment, and that is, I think the other opportunity would be to have greater emphasis on pay for performance, where you shift more to finding those kind of outcomes and being able to do a reward on that. There was an intent to do that with the establishment of the Conservation Stewardship Program, original Conservation Security Program, but it didn't end up that way. So even though it was created in the 2002 Farm Bill, it ended up in 2008 being able to revise it to be achieving greater outcomes and trying to do payments based on those improved performance. But there's a lot more that can be done to strengthen pay for performance. And that's another way of targeting.
If you make a change in a conservation program such that you cut an individual state's funding allocation in half, you're probably going to have political problems, no matter how much transparency you have. If you have transparency so that it sets a direction for change that folks can see and understand, you've got a different thing. Had I been a little more elegant with the rollout in GRP instead of just saying the Great Plain, might have had a different result. And those are the lessons learned. And it's about a merger of economics, scientific science, and political science, as you can understand.
I wonder if we layered on the other keyword competition. I mean, we know that bidding down was tried and pulled out, but what about competition at the state or the watershed level? So we say, come on, Idaho, show us your best targeted watershed project, and really make the case that you deserve this money better to clean up X, Y, Z water bodies, and you're demonstrating A, B, and C is in place.
I appreciate you raising that, Michelle, because I have believed all along, and we have been talking about trading concepts and trading water quality benefits, that we should back up a little and think about how do you put market forces into how we administer programs. And that would mean you allow a little bidding down in some of these programs. I did a little experiment when I was chief of NRCS, and we actually did a reverse auction on the Wetlands Reserve Program. We said in certain states with a large degree of geographic uniformity, all of these WRP acres essentially have the same value. So who wants in at 3,000 an acre? Okay, well, we got too many people then. Who wants in at 2,500? Who wants in at 2,000? Who wants in at 1,800? Okay, that takes care of the pool. Go sign your contracts. That is a pretty nifty way of putting market forces in place. If we merged a little bit of these transparent market forces into the administration of the programs, we could then also move those more effectively into our water quality trading platforms. Because what we're trying to do right now is transfer extraordinarily bureaucratic, high-cost efforts of experience from government programs into trading programs, and it's not working. And we've got to figure out a way to bring that together in a